Okay, ladies, we had the opportunity to have a moment, if you will, in the world of women leadership, um, what we call the future of all the world and everything. And so this is a critical moment in time, a critical moment in history. And we want to talk about some of our concerns as it relates to women leadership, women in power, our next steps, building for the next generation. So I'm going to start at this end. I'm going to allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves and then tell us about do you think the state of womanhood actually is right now? Rachel.
Out of me. Okay. So thank you very much, Adrian. It's a real privilege and honor to be here. I'm a New Zealander. I head up Fleischmann Hillard's New York office, and I got to there via way of Hong Kong and China. I actually started my life as a musician and then journalist and then PR consultancy. And so reinvention is really part of my narrative. I think that the state of womanhood today is variable, very variable. New Zealand is a country where women got to vote first. And so we've got a lot of role models. In my lifetime, 3 women prime ministers. But today we're seeing a lot of headwinds, as this panel is all about. And I think the culture of conformity for women has never been stronger. Whatever ecosystem you're in, that draw, that pull, and the price for non-conforming has never been higher. And I think that that's something, we'd like to explore further today.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, Adrian. It's wonderful to see everybody. I'm Monique Gary. I am a breast surgical oncologist, and I'm the chief medical officer for BEXA, which is an innovative, expansive biotech and solutions provider for early detection for breast cancer. When I think about the state of women today, especially as it relates to healthcare, it's not lost on me this moment to be on this mountaintop on MLK Day, because one of his quotes, one of his famous quotes is that the greatest inequity, one of the most shocking inequities, is in healthcare, right? It is inequity in healthcare. And when we look at the women's health gap, 25 million in lost life due to early mortality, 25 to 75% of women who are being diagnosed young with disease, maternal fetal mortality, cancer, heart disease. And there's a paucity of research around these and solutions for these. And when we talk about closing that gap, $100 trillion possible innovative benefit, right? In terms of revenue, in terms of improving the GDP globally. And so there's a huge opportunity and a moral imperative, because what I'm seeing as a healthcare provider is that we are being diagnosed younger and younger with things like breast cancer, right? We're seeing more maternal fetal mortality, and we really need to lean into the conversation, not just around the problem, but around the solutions for the problem. So women's healthcare in 2025 is in trouble, and we've got to be solutions and collaboratively oriented in order to attack it.
Thank you. Felicia.
Thank you, Adrian, for having us, and it's such an honor to be here. It's my first time in Davos, and it's truly an honor. I've spent the last 25 years in corporate America, most recently as an executive at Google, as their vice president of partnerships, and left just about 5 months ago after over 2 decades to found my company Seed, which is an AI-powered storytelling platform and well-being organization. And when I think of the state of women, I always look at the data first. Of course, it feels good, it feels inspiring, it feels like we've made tremendous progress. However, if you look at Fortune 500 companies today, only 10% of those sitting CEOs are women. And of that 10% who are women for Fortune 500, 6 identify as women of color. Not 6%, but the N count 6. And so that's a startling metric. One of the 6 is a good friend of ours, the Shunda Duckett. 2 are Black women, I should point out, of the 6. But then if you also look at additional statistics, in history, there are nearly 200 countries in the world, 80 have been led. Their heads of state, their presidents have been women in history. It's not missed on me that today is the inauguration for the 47th president of the United States, when we've never had a woman in history as president. But there have been 80 heads of state, women presidents or heads of state in history. But then if you look at the data also, any company any organization that prioritizes DEI and specifically women in leadership has at minimum a 19% bottom line increase in 1 year. And so the state, to me, as we look at the headwinds, is, we are facing a really pivotal moment in our time as women leaders and women in history. And I think we're seeing a great exodus. Even Forbes and McKinsey said that women leaders at 40% are leaving their senior roles now at the fastest rate in history. And so I really think that we're at an impasse, and I'm happy to be having this conversation today about it.
So hello, good morning. I'm Ana Domingues. I come from Brazil. So it's still a little bit chilly for me today here. I am the CEO of Flashman Hillard in Brazil. I was born in a rural part of Brazil, in a very small town, and I happened to be single mom when I was 20. So I had two twin kids, girls. And I would say that I had a lot of headwinds to face to arrive where I am right now. And I think that what really made difference for me was the fact that I found supporters, women leaders, and the company that I am now that really supported me throughout my career, really supported, mentored me. And this company in Brazil happens to be 100% women leaders. So I'm 100% sure that this made a difference in my life. Not to say that I had a lot of male supporters as well. I think that the state of women, especially when I look at Latin America and Brazil, I think that I agree with all of you. I think that we made progress. We have to make more and more progress. And I think that we have to start to look more and more into the legal frameworks that we are developing in Americas, in South America. We have good practices in Europe. We have good practices in Latin America. And I think that in order to really make this evolution that we see so far something stable, continuous, because yes, we can see these things retrocess. But in order to really keep moving, I think that we are in a moment that we have to do more and more advocacy, and we have to influence public policy and legal frameworks all around the world to really make sure that we have our places confirmed. And what we need is that, right? We need opportunity. We need just the place, and we can do it. So this is more or less how I see and how I would like to also continue this conversation.
Thank you all for those opening comments. And some of the key things that I heard you talk about were advocacy and policy and the state of women and the percentages that you gave of, just how many women leaders in history that we've had is still less than 100. It's a dismal number. But we have, what's the percentage of the world of women? Is there anyone, is it half of the population, are women, right? I'm making up that stat. I don't have the hard stat, give or take, right? Like 49, it's women. So there is power in terms of what we have in our vote, but we see, and I'm going to just speak about the recent activities specifically in the U.S. or allow us, I know this is a global community, but we've had impact on the world. We've seen that a lot of women have voted against their own interests. Women have not traditionally or historically in this particular case in the last 20 years of elections have not leaned in to support other women who were qualified. What do you think it is, or in the mindset that is preventing women to double down on some of the policies that have been created to still vote against their own interests? And anyone can jump in. You leaned a little forward, so Rachel, I'll go there.
Okay. Well, I'm a New Zealander commenting on the US election, so that's not always a good thing. But
We want that.
Yes, what are other, how you see us?
So, I mean, coming from New Zealand, obviously there are a lot of policies in place that support representation, proportional representation. There are also social policies in place. And so I think both of those things do encourage greater direct correlation, if you like, or association between women's interests and women voting and to support their interests. I do think in the US, and maybe this is partly influenced by social media, that there are barriers to women outside of those policy and legal frameworks. There are barriers to women really stepping outside and making their own rules. And that sort of sense of conformity that starts from the sorority, in universities and pervades, it really supports strong communities for women, which is good. But it also sets a lot of ground rules for how you behave, how you think, what you do. And I think that it's getting that diversity within that context is important for getting different perspectives that allow people to see that if you just follow a certain group, it's good in some ways, but think for yourself and others.
Anyone else?
I think it's fear. I do, and this is coming from
And
the.
they're afraid of what? Like what?
If you can't see it, it's hard to believe it. I'm sorry to put it in such simple terms, but I'm the daughter of two politicians, elected officials. My mom was an elected leader. My dad, United States Congressman. They both retired just a few months ago. My grandfather too was an elected leader back in North Carolina, in the States where I'm from. And I also worked for President Obama for 4 years. I worked for the Obama administration and for his campaign, and I was in the field. I had hand-to-hand, heart-to-heart conversations with people who were trying to put food on the table. And when I would have candid conversations, not just then, but even now in this most recent election cycle, like, what is the block? Like, what's the actual barrier? Because if we're talking about reproductive health, if we're talking about the health disparities that you mentioned before, if we're talking about financial freedom, if we're talking about families and healthcare and taking care of our aging parents, then the choice should be simple. And it boils down to fear. And I think it's hard to imagine for some, not for us, I would imagine, but for many, it's hard to envision a woman leader when you've never had one in the highest seat in the land. And so, this is not to give any excuses to why, there is voter apathy, why there are people who abandon their own interests for tradition or for what they believe to be right or what they were taught. However, there is an inherent fear, even among women sometimes, to vote for other women because we fear what could happen. Can we trust that the world is ready to receive us, right? So less about the woman because we know our qualifications, but more about the environment and are we ready to receive and embrace and respect a woman in that type of leadership position? And I think we are, but many don't, in my humble opinion.
Go ahead. I was going to just say the idea of seeing it and believing it. We know there was a woman president in Ireland. There's been a woman president in Mexico. So talk a little bit about the women leaders that you've seen, but still.
Yes, I think that there are a lot of similarities if I look at what you just said, Valisha. I think there is a kind of fear also when you look at Latin American countries, for instance, but another type of fear. You never think about being a politician in Brazil because, in general, politics is related to corruption in these countries, much more than in developed countries. We have at the moment the proper law to enforce that parties have the minimum of 30% women candidates, which they do. They really meet this criteria, but sometimes it's a loose criteria because they don't really make the effort to put this woman in a position within the party that will make them like very eligible. So in the end, we have less than around 15% women elected in the Congress. And of course, when women see that in Brazil, they say, why would I bother? And what the level of effort that I would have to make, the kind of sexism that I would have to face to be there and again receive more backlash. So I think that we have to overcome this fear. And I think that we should do that by, first of all, educating girls to be more open to politics. And this is something that we don't do in general in Latin American countries. I think this is one thing. And the other thing is to really make sure that these laws that we have, they really do happen. And how we do that? We have already a lot of advocacy movements. We have here Giovanna, she has a women leadership initiative in Brazil. We have many more. We have to be more focused on public policy, on politics, in order to make sure that these laws, they are being not only out there, but that they are really being enforced. This is more how I see.
You were going to say something.
Yes, I think, with respect to women voters voting against their own self-interest, you mentioned something really important, which is we're not a monolith, right? And so the fear of being in conformity to one ideology, I think, is off-putting to some women, but recognizing that, when we focus on the issues that are universal to women, and you mentioned quite a few of them, we can find some common ground. One of the first real key points to conflict resolution is finding common ground. And I don't think that we did that successfully in this particular election, this most recent one. But the second point is that, when you control the narrative, you can discredit the deliverer of a message, right? And thereby discrediting the message also. And I think we have seen a great deal of that as well. And so who controls that narrative and how they spin that narrative about what a woman is saying in leadership is something that's really key that voters listen to, they hone into, and it gets hammered over and over and over again. And it does discredit the messenger and the message.
Yeah, I think two key things is that messenger and who controls the story and what we see and what we feel and how we respond. I think, we're at points in our careers where, we've been able to overcome some of those barriers and still fight. But to your point, what are the younger women looking at when they see us? What do we need in terms of our plan now? We're not competing with one another. We're really building and providing for that next generation. So we're in that mood of succession planning, right? And I'd love to hear from our fifth panelist, our great panelist, Trisha Rao, who's going to come up. And I want Trisha to talk about what it is that next generation is looking for, what she has found to be her success point, and then what can we do as leaders, women leaders, to help that next generation tell the story differently, to provide that hope for them. So Trisha, come on up. Please give her a round of applause. She's our fifth surprise panelist. And you can take my seat. Take my seat. Come. And just give us some insight. Tell everybody all the great things that you've built and how old you are, because she's a superstar. And what are you looking for from us? And then, what do you have planned for the future in your forward-focused mindset? If that doesn't work, you can have my mic. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name's Trisha. As you know, I'm here as the founder of GLOW, my nonprofit, which serves to create solutions to problems like global health, food inequity, and refugee services using art and science. So we do projects in those areas. So that's about me. And to answer your question, I think, firstly, mentorship can be really powerful. I've had the fortune to have many, amazing role models. So I think being able to be a mentor and give advice and really be someone who can guide them. I'm actually graduating high school soon. So I think going into college, having a mentor or a guide can be really useful in terms of, knowing what you want to do, learning from different experiences and having a really diverse perspective. I think also helping young women create networks. I think networking can be a hard skill to learn. And I think having someone who is experienced and can help you learn that can be really powerful. And also being, I think, a visible role model. I think being someone who women can look up to and see inspiration in is really inspiring, and it may like kind of like all of you were talking about, how if you see that, maybe your mind opens to the possibility that you could be that in the future. So I think seeing that can be useful. Like for Glow, we actually have it's kind of like a blog that focuses on highlighting our projects, but also women leaders. So I think that can be really useful. Yeah, I think that's that's what I would have to say to that
I think
question.
you're being very humble. She doesn't tell how many you've written books. Yes,
Oh,
thank you for the round.
Yeah, I can talk about
Share
that.
about the books that she's
Yeah,
written. Yes.
Yeah, so I actually wrote a book called Believe in Yourself. I've done a lot of work with like refugees in the past, so that I wrote a book called I wrote the book, and it was meant to serve as a message of hope. So it has a poem written by me and art. I'm also an artist, and it focuses on uplifting refugees through spreading this message of hope and other core life lessons. So I actually got to launch it in Istanbul in 2016. So I read to Syrian refugees, and I think something that really struck with me with that experience was how resilient they were. And I think connecting back to your question, they were able to, have dreams of what they want to be in the future, and seeing even the children, especially the young girls, have these dreams of being doctors, being politicians, and so many other things was really cool. And I think they were able to do that because they had someone who they could look up to in that community. And I think the book also, helped give them hope. So yeah.
Well, I hope you feel inspired by the women and by the panel. Please give her a round of applause. She's the future as we plan succession planning. So as we wrap, because with your last thoughts, and this is, what advice, what support are you lending to Tricia and the next generation of women and leaders, and to anyone else in the audience, men who have daughters who are supporting the next generation? She mentioned more visibility of women. We talked about that. If you could see, could be more access to mentorship and sponsorship. So please share your last thoughts about hope for Tricia. Go ahead.
Yes, I think first of all, it's so beautiful to listen to what you said, because I think the inspiration is reciprocal. So what you say gives us a lot of fuel and inspiration to keep doing what we're doing, to be consistent, to be resilient despite all the headwinds, right? So I think you are inspiring us as well. So thank you very much. This is what I would like to say.
Thank you.
There's so many things. I think mentorship for sure, right? You've inspired me to continue mentoring and creating a space for the women in our lives who are leaders to be more accessible, right? Folks get so busy, and just making sure that I'm reminding the people in my life to take a beat and make sure that they're lifting as they're continuing to climb. And the other thing is, so many women that we know and love and respect don't do panels like this, right? And sometimes it's out of fear, sometimes it's out of the time. And so I plan to, after hearing you say how much representation matters, to inspire the other women in my life to take these seats and these platforms, because there's no shame in sharing your story and still going back into the office to do the work. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And piggybacking off of that, I think we have to listen to, believe, and center the voices of women in the conversation, whether it's healthcare, whether it's politics, whether it's in biotech. And what I mean by that is women will tell you, right? In our industry, in breast care, breast early detection, women told us what they wanted, they told us what they didn't want. And so we're able to craft sensible solutions, practical, adoptable, globally scalable solutions for that, just by listening to women. And I think that that's a really key element, because sometimes we're not the loudest voice in the room, and it takes sponsors, it takes individuals who will not only mentor, but allow those voices to come forward. And I'll give you a key example, and I'm gonna embarrass him, but our CEO is here, and our chief chief operating officer, she is a woman, our chief revenue officer, our chief medical officer, and he's perpetually pushing us forward into leadership and establishing things like a nonprofit to help really tackle some of the global issues in breast care. So I think that level of sponsorship, of putting your name, your brand on the line, is what people should be taking away from this, because the data is out there. It speaks for itself, but we really need people who are willing to take action. And that, I think, is going to help to close these gaps.
Fantastic. Rachel, you have our closing thought.
We've talked about fear and we've talked about courage. And I would love us all to be chief courage officers, giving each other courage to keep on going and to make sure that despite the headwinds, we don't lose hope. We don't lose inspiration. We take inspiration from others and we make sure it happens, because only we can give each other courage. And so if we can each be a chief courage officer for somebody else, then the world will be a better place.
I love it. Ladies, thank you so much. Anna, Alicia, Trisha, Dr. Monique, and Rachel. Please give them another round of applause. The next generation of chief courage officers. I love it.